I'm an urban explorer. Urban exploration, or Urbex, as we call it in the community, is the exploration of man-made structures, often abandoned or hidden from the general public. Generally speaking, photography has played a large role in its popularity, but historical documentation has also become a factor in recent years. As austerity has taken hold in the UK, urban decay has become much more prominent, with abandoned factories, amusement parks, and other such places becoming increasingly common across the country. To my knowledge, the term urban exploration was invented in the mid-90s by a Canadian guy by the name of Jeff Chapman. But one particularly harrowing story tells of a French urban explorer by the name of Philibert Aspert. The story goes that Monsieur Aspert was a hospital porter in the 18th century who had heard rumors that there were riches to be found in the deep, winding catacombs beneath Paris. Priceless jewels, gold medallions, and 100-year-old bottles of expensive spirits waited for those who were brave enough to search for them. Monsieur Aspert packed a knapsack, bid his wife adieu, then wandered down into the catacombs in search of his fortune. His skeleton was discovered in the damp, dark tunnels just over 11 years later. Now, I'm not sure if I believe that story. There's always been a kind of glamour that came with the apparent dangers of urban exploration, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't find that attractive. But the story of the French explorers seems a little too far-fetched for me. Not to mention that the risks involved these days are minimal. It's pretty much impossible to get lost, and an emergency mobile phone means that medical assistance is usually just minutes away. That being said, it doesn't mean you find some genuinely weird or disturbing things while exploring. And not too long ago, myself and a friend of mine explored a place that actually made me question if I wanted to involve myself in Urbex anymore. This is that story. Just outside of Farnham, in a leafy, rural place called Surrey in England, stands an old abandoned puppy mill. The building has been deserted since 82-year-old John Lowe was arrested for killing his former partner and her daughter with a high-powered shotgun. He had shot his wife, Christine Lee, at point-blank range with the shotgun, later telling police he had wanted to put her down. His daughter Lucy Lee made a call to emergency services before courageously returning to the scene of the crime to face her killer one final time. The building has a sinister air about it before we even laid eyes on it, but when we actually saw the thing, the apprehension was palpable. It looked like a typical haunted house, all red brick and Victorian arches, like it was just waiting to be the cover art of the next Stephen King novel. We took a few pictures, nervously chuckling to each other as we made our way inside. The interior has been almost completely gutted. There wasn't a scrap of furniture to be seen, and almost all of the electrical fittings had been torn out to prevent accidental fires. The glass windows of the conservatory attached to the house had smashed wholesale. Not a single pane of glass had survived some previous visit from local vandals. It only added to the eerie feeling of the place, like some terrible vengeance had been wrought by angry locals trying to destroy a place that was haunted by so many terrible events. My friend and I separated as I ventured upstairs while he remained on the ground floor, searching the kitchen. The upstairs bedrooms were still carpeted, but leaks in the roof meant that large patches of black mold were growing on the walls and floors. The place reeked of rot. Yet, just as I was headed back downstairs, I heard my friend call out for me to join him in the kitchen. And all the time I'd known him, I'd never, ever known him to sound so scared. My initial thought was that we'd been joined by some police who'd received reports of us exploring the murder scene. The empty alcohol containers on the first floor told me that this place was probably the haunt of drug users and criminals. All it would take was a simple explanation, maybe with us walking away with cautions. As I entered the kitchen, there were no signs of police, just my friend staring wide-eyed at one of the white-painted walls. When I asked him what was wrong, he just pointed at the spot on the wall he was staring at, not saying a word. There, on the wall, was a small, jagged hole in the masonry, framed by some dark, muddy stain. It only took me a moment to realize just what I was looking at. It was a hole made by the shot that killed Christine Lee. It must have been. The muddy stain around the ragged opening must have been her blood. I peered closer, recoiling in revulsion as I saw something that clung to the jagged edges of the roughly cut hole. A few fibrous strands of something dark and glossy, matted together with the same muddy stain that marred the white-painted walls. It was hair. Human hair. In all my time taking part in Urbex trips, I had never felt so utterly terrified. I'd been chased by the cops, punched by angry security guards, but I'd never felt anything like this. The death was thick in the air. It was a horrible feeling, just knowing that something so terrible had happened right where we were standing. I've never believed in the ghosts or anything remotely paranormal, but there's absolutely no denying the feeling that came over us as we stared in horror at that hole that the fatal gunshot had made. It was haunting. The place felt haunted. It felt exactly as if we were transgressing on some kind of hallowed ground, disturbing the restless spirits that lingered in the place they had so horribly lost their lives. It felt wrong. I turned to my friend, giving him a look that said far, far more than words ever could. He just nodded before we quietly made our way out of the building, not once looking back as we walked back through the woods towards town. I'm still very active in the Urbex community, although I did take a prolonged break from it after what I saw in the Low House down in Surrey. I now actively warn people against visiting former murder scenes, telling them that some places are better left undisturbed. Like I said, I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but that doesn't mean that some places aren't haunted. Not haunted by ghosts, but by the reality of just how cruel and heartless human beings can be toward each other, even people they love. About 13 years ago, a few buddies and I were really into Urbex. We didn't call it that back then. We weren't part of any sort of community, nor were we into taking photographs of the places we visited. We'd find some old apocalyptic-looking derelict on a Friday or Saturday night, get some beers and some smokes, then spend the night getting wasted and fantasizing about zombie survival scenarios. I've pretty much settled down now. I'm in a long-term relationship, and we're even talking about having kids. I doubt my girlfriend would be too keen on me exploring old abandoned buildings, but that's not exactly why I don't Urbex anymore. The reason I stopped is because of what we saw at the Danvers State Medical Hospital shortly before it was demolished back in 2007. So, there's this movie that came out in 2001 called Session 9. We saw it in the movie theater near Boston Common and were instantly obsessed. Sure, it's a good movie, but the star isn't really David Caruso. The real star is Danvers State Medical Hospital. Location scouts must have giggled like schoolgirls when they laid eyes on Danvers. It looks more like Hogwarts than a place where some of Massachusetts' most deranged mental patients were housed. The huge Gothic building was built in 1874 and is quite the sight to behold. Seriously, Google it, and you'll see for yourself. But in the early 90s, it was abandoned when all remaining patients were transferred to other sites. Once we learned that the magnificent-looking building was only 30 minutes north of Boston, we were already making plans to visit for a little midnight drinking session. One Friday night, we make the drive up there, parking our buddy's car about a mile away before walking over to the abandoned hospital. We may or may not have committed criminal damage in breaking through the flimsy perimeter fencing. I'd rather not say anything too incriminating. I don't want to get arrested over some dumb Reddit post. But once we're inside, it's as incredible as we imagined. The place didn't feel like it had ever been a hospital. We picture hospitals these days as being these white on steel, sterile places, but Danvers really did feel like it was straight out of a Harry Potter movie. Intricate patterns on the tiled floors, grand staircases, more like an old mansion than a treatment center. We're still in awe when we decide to make our way up one of the staircases to explore the upper floors, wandering down long, dark corridors with the only light being from cheap, plastic flashlights we were carrying. One such corridor had lots of smaller rooms running off of it. It was clearly some kind of high-security wing. The rooms looked more like prison cells than hospital rooms. There were even rusted iron shackles still attached to some of the walls, evidently where some patients were restrained when they became too violent. But when I shined my flashlight into another one of the smaller, cell-like rooms, I froze. Caught in my torch beam was the dull steel of a steak knife. I can still remember how its teeth glittered in the bright, white light. Next to it, a rather dirty-looking sleeping bag lay on the cold, tiled floor. Someone was here with us. I can't remember who said it, but one of my buddies muttered something about us not being alone here. And when a strange voice spoke through the darkness, I think all of us just about jumped out of our skin. "Hi." That's all it said, at first anyway. There's a young, dirty homeless-looking guy walking down the corridor towards us, hands up, palms out. I can't remember the exact exchange. My adrenaline was pumping the entire time, but I'll try to paraphrase. "We were just about to leave, dude. We don't want any trouble." "Nah, it's all good," he replied. Something friendly in his voice kinda set me at ease. "I didn't mean to scare you guys. It's cool, kind of a scary place anyway." He's separated from what I assumed was his steak knife, but I still keep my eyes on where it was sat in the darkness, making sure he won't be able to grab it if he decides he doesn't like us so much. But, as I said, he was actually pretty friendly for a guy who seemed to be living in an abandoned insane asylum. We gave him a beer, a kind of peace offering, and then spent about a half hour just wandering the corridors and talking. None of us wanted to press him on why he was there. He seemed nice enough, so we passed the time talking about Boston, complaining about the Sox, that sort of thing. After a while, he does, in fact, tell us some of his stories, how he's been a drifter for a while, not exactly homeless, but not exactly the 9-to-5 kind of dude either. He liked to explore weird, old places too, so that was like another half hour listening to all the awesome, abandoned places he'd visited across America. He'd even been to Bodie, California, which has like this legendary status among Urbex enthusiasts because it's an entire mining town that was abandoned after the gold rush or something. So, about the point that we're thinking this is one of the coolest guys we've ever met, he asks us something that, at first, we thought was some kind of joke. "So, you guys are human, right?" One of my buddies actually laughed, but the guy shot him this look, man, if looks could kill. He was serious, and the more it dawned on us that he was 100% serious, the more freaked out we became. I just hate meeting cool people, then finding out that they're reptilians, you know? You can only really tell once you peel that fake layer of skin off. That's what the knife is for. He'd seen my eyes flicking towards it. "Don't look so nervous, dude, you guys seem cool. But sometimes, it just gets real tiring. They've been after me for so long now, and they never, ever stop. Sometimes, I think I should just kill everyone, just to be safe." An uncomfortable silence came over us. I wanted to run from this crazy bastard, but that might anger him. And we really didn't want to anger him. "Damn, dude, we're almost out of beer," one of my buddies says. "Here, man, take our last one. We'll go buy some more and be back in like an hour." Again, probably not word for word, but I'll never forget the relief I felt when he said those words. It was a stroke of absolute genius to be able to get us out of there so quickly, without raising too much suspicion in the guy. The homeless-looking crazy person seemed very happy at this, like he'd made himself a trio of new friends, guys he could finally trust. And as we walked out of Danvers and back towards the car, I felt a new, fresh feeling. Guilt. I'm an urban explorer from Scotland in the UK, and I've been involved in the Urbex community for coming up 15 years. I've probably explored more than 500 abandoned places over the years, and at least 99% of them are exactly what you'd expect: rundown houses, factories, and hospitals, creepy enough to make for amazing photography, but nothing remotely sinister about them. Honestly, the number one feeling you get from Urbex is a kind of sadness, especially when the site in question is an old Gothic building that's more deserving of investment, not demolition. I've been to pretty much every stereotypically creepy place you can imagine. Old Victorian hospitals, haunted stately homes in the middle of nowhere, several morgues and operating theaters, abandoned graveyards, creepy basements, and tunnels, you name it, and I've explored it. But one place was different from all the others. Out of all the places I've explored, only one genuinely scared me. A bit of background information: we absolutely adore finding new places, but it's not exactly easy. It takes a hell of a lot of research, and we get most of our locations from Google Maps, news articles, land registries, and the obvious shares from other members of the Urbex set. So often, unless someone has left a kind of Urbex review, we don't know what a place will be like before we turn up. Sometimes they're sealed, empty, or demolished, and sometimes I wish this place had been like any of those. We would have turned up, found the place inaccessible, and simply gone home or found a pub to drink our disappointment away. A lot of the time, my Urbex pals and I will organize a kind of day trip, something to look forward to and bring relief from the stresses of our boring or stressful jobs. We'll go about visiting a certain town or city that has a few potential Urbex sites, and then explore them all throughout the course of a day. We get a hotel, find a few nice places to eat, but it also helps to socialize with the locals a wee bit. After a few pints, even the most hard-hearted of people will spill the beans on derelict buildings in the area. This one place was the last abandoned building of the trip. It was getting dark and rainy, as it often does in rural Scotland, but we decided to push on and get a few photos before sundown. We had kind of a long drive to get to the hotel, so we couldn't just put it off until the following day. At first, it didn't even seem abandoned, just a church in the middle of a very well-kept cemetery. My friend assured me that from his research, it definitely wasn't in use, and I was pretty keen to get inside because abandoned churches can make beautiful photos. Only, by this point, we were losing daylight at a rapid rate. We have to get in there if we wanted to make use of the last of the natural light. iPhone camera flashes just don't make for good photos. Only natural light produces the kind of results that get noticed on photography forums. The rotten back door to the church was wide open, old paint peeling in patches from the splintering wood. It was hardly the most inviting entrance, but the only visible way of getting into the building. One by one, making sure there was no one around to report us for trespass, we made our way inside. Side note, a lot of Urbex enthusiasts talk a good game about climbing into places, through open or broken windows, onto roofs to find service hatches and all that. I can categorically say that climbing an abandoned site is definitely not a good idea. From experience, the fastest way to the emergency room is to try climbing something that is literally falling apart. Inside, we came to what appeared to be a small kitchen. I'm not remotely religious, so it did kind of surprise me that whoever the priest was actually used to live in the church too. That kind of dedication to something so intangible is just beyond me, but I suppose that's why they call it faith. The kitchen naturally led onto a small corridor before opening up into the main church hall. That was the last time we spoke for a long, long time. There were beautifully colorful stained glass windows, albeit a little grimy from the abandonment, but that's not what drew our eyes. A distinctly uneasy feeling overtook us as we saw just what was laid out in the hall before us. I, for one, was completely lost for words, while one of my friends went deathly pale, as if he'd seen an actual goddamn ghost in that old church. Instead of the standard empty pews and religious iconography, the interior of the church was filled with children's toys. They were stuffed neatly and uniformly into every pew, all facing the same way, forever listening to some silent sermon. All of the children's toys and dolls were worn and filthy, in a creepy kind of style that kids' toys haven't been made since like the 70s or 80s. There were little ornate prams and matchbox cars, all facing the same way, towards the empty priest's podium. It dawned on me that since there were no toys there, whoever had arranged them this way had stood at the podium and admired their handiwork. There was also a kind of bedroom area, one bed having been clearly made up for a child and surrounded by children's books. No adult-sized beds, not a single one, so I don't think it was anything like a homeless family squatting there. How long they'd been there for was anyone's guess. But one thing was clear: whatever the reason these toys were arranged like this, it was not a good or pure one. We left the place, still in silence, too creeped out to discuss the scene as we drove back to the hotel we were staying at. The mood of the whole day had changed in mere moments. It was still too raw to try to make sense of the things we'd just seen. Despite outward appearances, the place was collapsing inside. A huge hole in the floor had formed, and damp was setting in, so any evidence of the toys, the bed, and the sinister atmosphere may well be lost or buried soon. I don't know if anyone else has discovered this place or knows what happened, but it's not somewhere I'll ever return to. I refuse to share the location even with my closest explorer friends, for fear that if they visit, they'll run into whoever had arranged those toys into a ghostly congregation.